Well, Joe Reynolds, it's a real privilege to get to talk to you. And I mentioned to you, I've seen you speak before, at least on videotape, and relate some of your experiences. And I want to share some of those with the lawyers of Texas
Okay.
and with others. I want to start way back, though. What made you want to be a lawyer to begin with?
Well, I never knew my grandfather on my mother's side lived in Tyler, Texas. And he was a leader in that community. He had a law partner named Jim Hogg, and who was governor of Texas later. And my grandfather must have been a man for all seasons. Ever Martha Greenhill, my cousin, tells me I'm the spitting image of my grandfather. Says that every time she sees me, she sees him. But at any rate, I thought, well, I want to be a lawyer.
I want to follow in his footsteps.
Yeah.
You grew up in Waco, I think.
I grew up in Waco. My dad worked the railroad and we were back and forth during the Depression, but basically I lived in Waco all of my high school days.
And you never got to know your grandfather, but obviously you knew a lot of people who had been influenced by him through the years.
Right.
What did they tell you about him that stuck with you, that made you want to be a lawyer?
That people respected him, he was a man of integrity, and that he was not ashamed of the gospel of Christ.
And
Key word.
and that always stuck with you.
I didn't know what it meant, but later it came to mean something to me.
Now, you went to school in Waco. Where did you go to college?
Went to Baylor.
Okay. And I know you had a distinguished military career, but I don't know how it fell with your schooling. So tell us a little bit about that stage.
Well, I'd like to. It was in 1942. I'd just entered law school. I'd been to law school a while. And the Battle of Guadalcanal had just been finished. And we had to go to chapel every day in Baylor. It was August of 1942. And so President Neff said we had a speaker. And this speaker came on. It was a boy who had just come back from Guadalcanal. He was on crutches. He was in a Marine uniform with ribbons all over his chest. He was in dress blues. And he went up there on those crutches. And I jumped up along with two other men and rushed out there and signed up to join the Marine Corps.
Just made the decision
Just
in that
that
moment.
simple.
Huh? And left law school, left everything you were doing. Were you married at the time?
No.
Okay, so you were still single. What stage of law school were you in?
I was in basically my second year because I was taking summers. We were going.
Quarter system, yeah.
We were really moving fast in those days.
Going year round.
Yeah.
Well, you joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Ask him about the two other guys.
Yeah, I do want to hear about that. Who were the two other guys that joined
That
you?
stood in line. That's real interesting. There were actually three. One of them was named George Sire. He was ahead of me, Sire. But the first in line was a guy named Tom Berry. Didn't know him. He was from Austin. George Sire was in school at a place called St. Edwards or something. And the third guy was a guy named Dick Davis. And the four of us stood in that line. And then we joined the Marines together, went to boot camp together. And then when we got out of boot camp, we all went to Quantico together. And our lives were interwoven. And then we left Quantico, we scattered to the four winds.
They went into other areas of duty, and you went to the South Pacific.
Well, and I didn't see him again until the day of the D-Day at Iwo Jima. I went ashore about 4 o'clock that afternoon. The first person I saw was a guy by the name of Dick Davis.
That you joined up with.
And so we visited for about a few minutes. I was unloading ammunition, and about 2 weeks later on Nero, one night, it must have been 2 o'clock in the morning, this corporal crawled up to my foxhole and he said, "Lieutenant, there's a lieutenant on our left flank, wants to see you." And I crawled over at 2 o'clock in the morning and had a cup of coffee with George Sarr.
No kidding.
Yeah. He heated it by taking this coffee and digging a hole in the volcanic ash, which we were sleeping on, heated the coffee. And he said, "It's too bad about Dick Davis, isn't it?" I said, "What do you mean? I saw him D-Day." He said, "He was killed on D-Day."
So you were probably one of the last friends he saw.
Mm-hmm. And about a year ago, I gave the eulogy at Tom Berry's funeral. I gave the eulogy at George Sarr's funeral. I got to do the eulogy at Ronnie Bliss's funeral. My 3 heroes.
People who really had a big influence on you. Was Iwo Jima your first combat experience?
No, I went in the Valley of Guam.
Okay. So you'd already been on one beach.
I'd been on, well, I was actually sighted in the Weetok for 49 days before we were supposed to go into Saipan, but we were in reserve. And then they decided to send us in Guam.
You know, I've seen you speak before, and I want to hear you talk about these experiences because you related it many times to lessons you learned during that time, to the law practice that you had and the career that you've had in the community and in the law. But you're unique in that you really survived 2 of the deadliest battles in American history. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I saw him raise the flag at Iwo Jima. And that was an awesome experience. And then I came home, finished law school. And when I graduated from law school, I had good grades. And Judge James P. Alexander, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas, hired me as a briefing attorney for the Supreme Court of Texas.
Okay.
But I went down and was sworn in, and I ran into a man that I knew by the name of Joe Greenhill. He said, I'm leaving this job and you're taking mine, but I'm going to go to work for the new Attorney General, and I want you to come to work for me as my assistant. So I talked to Judge Alexander. He said, fine. So my first day as a lawyer, I worked for the Attorney General of Texas under the direct supervision of a man named Joe Greenhill. And for 3 years of my life, I worked under him.
You've had some great mentors in your life, haven't
Well,
you?
one of the first things he did was send me on a deposition. I didn't know what a deposition was. But his client, the state of Texas, University of Texas, was being sued by a guy by the name of Heman Sweat. He wanted to go to the University of Texas. I read the pleadings, I can't say that. So I go over to sit in on the deposition of the president of Prairie View University. I'd never been to a deposition. Joe said, just go over and keep your mouth shut and just learn and just go, but you got to interview Dr. Evans. So I went over there and walked into this deposition next morning with my client, Dr. Evans. And this lawyer came in and introduced a black lawyer by the name of Thurgood Marshall. And I didn't know who he was or anything about him. Didn't take me long. But I tell you this, he treated me like a king.
Treated you with respect. Well, so here you are, sent over to your first deposition by one of Texas's great Supreme Court justices, and watching a deposition being taken by what would become the first African-American United States Supreme Court justice.
Mr. Marshall, in my career was interwoven after that. And he and I became great friends. And later in my life, I would be chairman of the board of the visitors of the Thurgood Marshall Law School at Texas Southern University.
That's a nice comeback around, isn't it?
You asked me in my questions who had influenced my legal career more than anybody, and there are three people.
Okay.
The first and foremost would be Joe Greenhill. I had the privilege of speaking at Joe's 90th birthday 2 years ago. And his wife called me about a month ago and said, "Joe wants you to do the eulogy at his funeral."
Really
And I
honored you.
told him I'd be proud. Second man was a guy by the name of Bert Tunks. Bert might have been the best lawyer I ever knew. And the third man that influenced my life, and it's a long, long story, was a man by the name of Leon Jaworski.
Tell us about that. Tell us how
Well,
you influenced.
I was busy practicing law in 1957. And the Attorney General of Texas was a guy by the name of Will Wilson. I didn't know him. But he called me on the phone from Austin and he said, "I have a lawsuit that I'm filing on behalf of the state of Texas, an antitrust case against all of the electrical contractors in Houston for setting prices, dividing up the business. And I want to hire you, because you did antitrust work under Joe, to represent the state of Texas in that case." So we filed the lawsuit. And it just so happened when the answers came in from the defendants, Leon Jaworski represented one defendant, Leroy Jeffers represented one of the defendants, Tom Phillips, the first, represented one of the defendants, and Jack Binion represented one of the defendants, and a guy named Ben Sewell represented the other.
Took all those guys to make up one of you?
No, they just, they were out of my league. And we had filed this lawsuit under state law, and they filed a motion to dismiss my case, not to the summary judgment, on the theory that the state antitrust laws had been preempted by the Sherman Act. And Judge Wilson granted it just like that. So I appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and I got a judge who had just become a judge who was on that bench. One was named Tom Coleman, one was named Spurgeon Bell, and the other was named Bill, famous. At any rate, I made my argument as the appellant. And when I finished my argument, Tom Phillips and all the lawyers on the other side got together, and I heard one of them say, "Who's going to file our motion for our motion for rehearing?"
That's a pretty good compliment.
And sure enough, they turned. I won that case. Story's not over. I beat them like a drum. And then about 2 months later, case is over, it's history. I got a call from Leon Jaworski. He says, "Jeanette and I are going to Las Vegas, and we'd like to take you and Susie as our guests." I mean, the age difference is. I said, "Okay, I think we'd like to go." And we did. And while we're sitting there eating dinner, Jack Binion comes in. All of them were there. And Colonel Jaworski said, "You've just been elected to the American College of Trial Lawyers." I said, "What's that?" Had to wait 3 months to be old enough to do it. But those men became my mentors, especially Colonel Jaworski. He said, "You're from Waco, I'm from Waco, Gail's from Waco. The three of us will make a good team."
I was going to ask, did you know him in Waco or know of him? Or?
Well, I only knew him. He lived next door to Gail. That's the only way I knew who he was.
Right. Tell me why he was Colonel Jaworski.
Because he was a colonel in the Army.
In the Army in World War II.
Everybody called him Colonel.
So,
Everybody called me you.
well, I think it's interesting, though, that for us to hear that these were lawyers that you met by working against them. And that tells us something about what the practice of law should be like.
I just recently had the privilege of writing a short article for the Houston Bar. And I mentioned this. I said I grew up with those lawyers who taught me, number one, my word is my bond. Number two, the lawyer on the other side is not my enemy. He is a professional doing his job, and he deserves respect, not anger or hatred.
And that's always stuck with you.
It's been my code.
That's, I think that's one of the great gifts of practicing law is the ability to get to know and spend time with other lawyers.
Look at my friend here. He and I were on opposite sides of a case.
That's how he and I met each other.
You know what? And I told that jury that Murray Fogler was one of the finest young men, lawyers in Texas, and one day he would be the best. You don't remember that, but that's what I told that jury. And I meant it then, and I mean it now.
I'll bet you he remembers it. I'll bet he does.
I'm still aspiring.
Well, you met these giants that lined up against you in a lawsuit in 1957. I mean, and they all became important to you in your career.
Yes.
I know at some point in time you got called back to military service.
Well, in 1950,
okay.
I had just moved. I hadn't been in Houston about, I'd tried one lawsuit, two lawsuits.
Really just starting your career out.
Yeah, well, when I left the Attorney General's office, my college roommate had been I had two college roommates at Baylor. One was named Fentress Bracewell, and the other was named Harry Patterson. Okay. So we became Bracewell, Reynolds, and Patterson. I was busy. I was fixing to go to trial. And I got my mail one morning, opened it up. It was in August of 1950, or July, end of August, end of July. And that little letter said, 10 days from this day, you will report to active duty with the Marine Corps. They couldn't do that to me. I'm a lawyer. I'm going to trial. I went. Got my uniform out, put it on. Believe it or not, that those days I could get in it. And I told my sweet, wonderful, beautiful wife by this time and my little boy, you'll love California. I'll be a legal officer, and you'll love living at Laguna Beach. So I landed at Camp Pendleton, and 3 days later, I went aboard ship, and 3 weeks from the day I left Houston, I led a platoon ashore at the Battle of Incheon.
So you weren't in the law department in the Marine Corps?
Never saw it. All I saw were the beach at Incheon.
You were right back in combat, just as you'd been in World War II.
And then I had I call it privilege, of being in the greatest battle of Marine Corps history.
Tell us
I
about
participated in the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir.
Tell us about that and your experience.
It was, we had 15,000 Marines at the reservoir. We're 20 miles from China, the Yalu River. It's November the 11th, a significant day. And you know what? I woke up on the ground that morning, sleeping on the ground, and it was 11 below zero. All I had was a little field jacket. The next thing you know, we're covered in snow. And then we learn that we are totally surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers.
There's 15,000 of you underdressed and
The temperature, but that became our greatest. That's what they were less stressed. My weapon, I've got a rifle up there. The reason I'm alive is because it froze on me.
I have heard this and I want to hear
Everybody's
it again.
heard it,
But it's important.
I hate to repeat it.
No, I want you to repeat it. This is
Well,
one of the reasons I'm
they
here.
call me the Sergeant York of the Korean War. I didn't shoot a Turk or anything. I turned my carbine on them, squeezed the trigger, and the blankety blank was frozen. It would save my life. They threw down their weapons and surrendered. Those guys, some of them didn't have on shoes. They had on tennis shoes, no socks. They were freezing to death.
So as cold as you were, they were worse off.
Colder than I was.
Yeah.
And I wrote a poem. You've heard my poem.
Well, I'd like to hear it again. I'd like to share it.
Well, true story. Commandant of the Marine Corps asked me to do this too. And it goes like this. One bitter night near Coterie, I captured one of the enemy. He read my eyes, he knew the deal, he knew at once I had to kill. In broken English, he made request to see the picture in his vest. And I nodded yes above battle noise, then stared with him at wife and boys. Go, I screamed, get out of here. And he turned and ran and disappeared. And oft I've wondered if he made it home, or is he buried in Korea's loam? Did he ever again his family see? But I've wondered most, for roles reversed, how he would have treated me.
And that kind of goes back to a lot of things that have influenced you. Your faith and all the other things.
Yeah.
When
God
did-
had a plan for me.
When did you write that poem?
I wrote it in '71. We were going up to A&M to a football game, and Mike Stevens, who was not my son, but he's a boy that we raised, and we loved. He was our son. And we're driving up there with Hunt and Mike and Dan, my three boys. And one of them asked me what was the greatest Thanksgiving I ever saw, expecting me to talk about that wasn't in a single time we won a football game against the Horns. Well, I said, give me a few minutes. And as we came into College Station, I said, y'all got to hear this. What do you mean we're going into get our seats? You got to listen to this. Mike was driving the car. I said, stop this car, Mike. I've written this on a napkin. And I called it Thanksgiving, 1950.
A lot to be thankful for.
I told him to make sure that he asked you how you met Jamel.
Okay.
And
You want me to answer that
I
question?
do. I want to hear about you meeting
Well,
Joe
that
Jamel.
is very, very interesting. I told you about running into Sire
Right. On Iwo Jima.
at Iwo Jima. Well, a few nights later, I heard that Sire had been evacuated, that he'd been shot in the butt. Oh, I loved it. I loved it.
Couldn't
I
wait to
loved
see
it.
him.
I ate it up. And they shipped him off to a hospital at Aya Heights in Honolulu. Well, I had the misfortune, a few nights after the flag raising, it was raining, and I pulled a Japanese airplane wing over me to keep off the rain, and a Japanese mortar hit that airplane wing, and I got shrapnel, aluminum all my legs. Burned. I didn't pay attention to it. Tore up my dungarees a little bit. The time I got back to Guam, our base station, my legs were the size of footballs. And I had blood poisoning all through my legs. So next thing you know, I'm being shipped out to hospital in Hialeah Heights. Lo and behold, I'm on the same floor with George Sire. And so he can't walk. I can. So I walked down to his room. I'd been there a few days. And there was a guy in his room I'd never laid eyes on. This guy I thought he was a PFC. He told me he was a gunny sergeant. I don't remember. We debate this. But he this guy was on his way to Guam to join my division. And he'd stopped at Pearl Harbor to refuel or whatever they'd do, and he knew Sire was in the hospital. He'd gone to visit Sire. And I had never seen a gunny sergeant treat a first lieutenant with such disrespect as this man treated Sire. He said he's Joe Jamail. Well, I didn't like Joe Jamail. It just really turned me off to see this squirt treat my buddy like dirt. And so when Joe left, I said, "Where did you find him?" He said, he said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "He's a great guy. He's my buddy." I said, "Well, you can have him." Well, next day I walked down there, and lo and behold, while I'm visiting with Sire, in comes Jamail. But this time he's got a cardboard box carrying with it. And what he had done, I was going to say bribe, but that's not a good word. He had bought from some Navy cook 12 cartons of eggnog mix. Now, Sire and I hadn't had a glass of milk in 2 years, just about. And I hadn't had ice cream since I joined the Marine Corps. So he drank 6 cartons, and I drank 6 cartons of eggnog mix. And from that day to this, Joe Jamail's been my hero.
And a lifelong friend. You guys see each other here in Houston?
I would say next to Gail, my closest friend is Joe Jamail. Mm-hmm. His children are all mine. And they're part of my life.
And the Marine Corps really has certain beliefs.
It's a brotherhood.
That stays with you, I guess, all your life.
Yeah, it's a brotherhood.
And what did that teach you that you needed to know to translate to a profession as you left the military?
It taught me that there's no substitute for victory. If you go to war, go to win, and not to sit in the sand.
So, as a trial lawyer, that stood you in good stead.
Right.
You went prepared and ready to go. Well, let's talk. You were injured.
I had my feet frozen.
Okay, and then this was in Korea.
Korean War.
And you were hospitalized a long time.
A year.
Did you recover well from that?
Pretty much.
Okay. You come back to Houston, I guess. Is your old firm still there?
Well, let me tell you what happened to me, and I have to brag a little bit. I came back, and I'm getting into the trial of my law business again. They treated me like kings. They took care of my family. It couldn't have been a better deal. And I get a call from Governor Allen Shivers. Didn't know him. He said, "I have volunteered you. I hope it's okay with you." I said, "What is this, Governor?" He said, "I am farming Democrats for Eisenhower, and you're going to be General Eisenhower's Exhibit A, and you're going to go with him all over America making speeches." Didn't work out exactly that way. I went all over Texas, speaking for General Eisenhower. And on the night of the election, I was on national TV with General Eisenhower.
Tell us about him. You were in
Well-
close proximity to.
Well, let me tell you how it worked. I went to Dallas, Texas to KRLD. He was in Boston, Massachusetts. And some way or another, they put us together. And he and I would talk back and forth. And at any rate, I told him if we either win that war or get out.
Mhm.
That's the way I felt about it. It's the way I feel today. It's the way I'll ever feel. And General Eisenhower became my hero and my friend.
What
Wrote
kind of
me
man?
letters.
What kind of man was he like to spend time with?
The man was fabulous to me. The next thing I know, I got a call from Judge Tom Kennerly, the federal judge, saying that I've been named to be U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. I said, no way. I said, I'm not prepared for this. He said, I'll see that you can handle it. And I said, give me a few years. So I went back to my law firm where I belong.
Went back to practicing law, or really trying to get started again practicing law. Tell us about the early years and your law firm. And
It was great. I've always been at the right place at the right time. I told the graduating class at Memorial High School, I told your daughter's group, if I had 1,000 lives to live, I'd be a lawyer in every one of them in Houston, Texas.
and why is that?
Well, I've had fun. I've had the privilege of trying the greatest cases. Had the privilege of representing nearly every school district in Texas in the desegregation days.
Right.
It worked out right. That's where Thurgood Marshall and I.
Cross paths again. Well, you know, it is interesting that times were changing and the law was changing. And the rule of law was being tested all over the country. What do you take away from that you would want to share with people today? Because a lot of them didn't live through those times.
I have a great respect for courts, more so then than I do now. I think a lawyer's reputation with the courts is as important as reputation to the community. And I want a lawyer, and the courts want lawyers that are honorable and they're not troublemakers. And a courtroom is not a battlefield. It's a place to find justice.
And you've seen some battlefields, and you've seen some courtrooms, and you know the difference between the two. What are the principal differences?
Well, on the battlefield, you got a man out there trying to kill you. He's going to if he can. But in a courtroom, if I go back to a lot of cases, every case, I've had lawyers on the other side. They may not like me, they may disagree with me, but they respect me.
Because everybody
when
has.
I said I'm going to do something, I do it.
It kind of goes back to that list of things that you said
Yeah.
Colonel Jaworski and others taught you.
Yeah.
You began practicing law And it was kind of intermittent thanks to the military, but things have changed a lot since then. What do you think are the most significant changes?
Well, Colonel Jaworski's responsible for this in many ways. He and I had his young lawyer by the name of Bradshaw and I were on a plane together coming home from Dallas. He was involved in the Billy Saul Estes case. And I don't remember what I was doing, but I was coming from Dallas on some very small case compared to his. And he told me that he didn't intend to ever walk into a courtroom again without knowing what every witness on the other side would say. And he turns to Brad and says, "You will take the deposition of every one of their witnesses before we go to trial." And I said, "Colonel, that's a lot of money you're going to be spending." He represented Anderson Clayton, I think was his client. He says, "We're going to do it right." I said, "You're going to open up Pandora's box. We are going to do it right. We don't want to go in the courtroom without knowing the facts."
Right.
When I started, you went in and the case lasted 3 days, and they're over. Then they started lasting weeks. And that's one of the big changes.
What would your observation be about that if we could
Well,
do
he could
something?
afford it, I couldn't.
Okay. And I guess that's one of the problems with
Well, it
the
makes the
change in
expense
discovery.
of cases jump. But I've tried lots of lawsuits. At one time, I think Henry Giesel had tried more lawsuits than any lawyer in Texas. You know why? He did workman's comp cases. He tried one a week
Right.
to a jury. And then Jamel he tried cases on, Henry was defending comp cases, Jamel was trying it.
Right.
And I was never in that business, but our cases didn't last long. We tried cases every week.
Tell me about the jury trial system and how you feel about it and its importance to our
Well,
society.
You've heard my story. I used to have a sign over my door. It said, "He who does not try his case to juries is a coward." Jamel came by one day and said, "I'm going out to speak to University of Houston Law School students. I want to take that sign." He took it. I never got it back.
You want me to ask him about it?
He knows it. He can't. He denies it ever existed. But we have fun.
But obviously you believe in the jury trial system.
I
Why
believe
is
in
it
the
so
jury
important?
system. And I believe it because I think most jurors want to do the right thing.
And you've tried a lot of cases, probably some of which disappointed you, but at the end of the day, do you still trust juries more than you trust any other system?
Can I tell you my most famous jury
Please do.
problem? I represent one of my clients through the years has been a company called Amarada Hess. Mr. Hess, I tried a case for Mr. Hess in Virgin Islands. It lasted a year. That's a story in itself. But Mr. Hess had a case down there on the ship channel where some contractor was supposed to build a pipeline underneath the ship channel to the Hess terminal and tie it into some gas wells or oil wells in the distance. Well, the thing broke in the middle of the ship channel, and it was bizarre. Lawsuit. This guy, Bob Gordon, a friend of John O'Quinn's, calls me from Dallas, and he said, "I'm a jury expert, and I want to help you pick a jury in that case." So I asked Mr. McCollum, he'd do what he wants to do. So I did. We go down and pick the jury, And I'm not feeling well, so Ed Janelle is going to really try the case for me. And the lawyer on the other side is a young man named Dick Schwartz. And I knew Dick Schwartz. I'd known him for his mother saved my life, which is a long story. The Schwartzes are dear friends of mine. And so, at any rate, we went to pick the jury. Panel comes in, it's Judge Link's court. The panel's there, and there's a little old girl on the front row. And she raises her hand. She says, "Judge, I hate lawyers. And I don't believe a word Mr. Schwartz is saying." And it's voir dire. And Dick just stands there. He turns to the judge, and the judge, nobody says anything.
Nobody knew what to do.
I said, "Judge, can I say something?" "Yes, sir, please do." So I stood up and I said, "Jury, ladies and gentlemen, I can understand where you are, but I said, let me tell you something." I said, "You've got two great young lawyers in this case." I said, "I can vouch for Dick Schwartz. He's on the other side of my lawsuit. But I know this man, and he's honorable, and he's a man of integrity, and he knows how to try lawsuits, and he's not going to waste your time." I said, "Ed Janelle over here, I've known him since he was a baby. His parents likewise are friends of mine. And he is a fine, outstanding young lawyer. If we've got a problem, and they're trying to resolve it, then we want you to do it." She says, "I don't believe a word you said." The judge let her go. We picked a jury. And middle of the case, I decided this case needs to be settled. I asked the judge if I can go see my client, see Mr. McCollum, who had testified in the case. He said on one condition, he said, "Do what you want to, but I'd like to know if you were to poll the jury and ask them what they think." So I go back, and when I walk in the courtroom, the jury claps. They knew the case was over, and they knew that I had gone to see the witness, Mr. McCollum. And so I said, "I'm supposed to ask you what you think." There was a lawyer on the panel. It was Melvin Dow's young partner. Melvin is one of the best friends I've got in the world, and still is. I said, "What did you think?" He said, "I hated your side." He said, "You're a big contractor, and you should have given this guy a second chance." And the other lawyer, the guy, the lawyer, I've forgotten his name, he said, "Mr. Reynolds, your client took advantage." I said, "Took advantage?" And then, so at any rate, that little woman that I was supposed to get, she said, "I hated your client." That's the three people he told me to pick.
Mm-hmm. The jury consultant.
Yeah. So the black guy that he told me I had to get rid of and couldn't, he said, "Let me ask you a question, Mr. Reynolds." He said, "Did Mr. Mack," he said, "Incidentally, I liked your relationship with Mr. Mack. You're friends, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." "And you like him and he likes you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Did you say that Mr. Mack, the president of Amaranta Hess, never graduated from high school?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Would you do me a favor?" He said, "Would you tell Mr. Mack that I think he's the kind of man that made America great, and I couldn't wait to vote for him." And the black school teacher, she said, this is another one I was supposed to knock off, couldn't. She said, "You were the attorney for the North Forest School District, weren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You saved our school system." And she said, "You're one of my heroes." And I couldn't wait to vote for you. But the coup de grace was the accountant that he had told me, "Get rid of that woman." And she said, "I've got to ask you a question." She says, "Do you have a double?" I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "What's his name?" I said, "Cary Grant." She said, "Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Grant, you're the spitting image of my daddy." I couldn't wait to vote for you.
How many times after that did you use jury consultants?
None.
That's great. Well, I want to hear what you would say to somebody just starting out, interested in the career, the profession of being a lawyer. What advice would you give them?
I would say if you associate yourself with people you like, want to go to work in the morning, want to be with the people that are in your office. And that is more important than money. It's more important than wages. But you got to like where you work.
You've worked with a lot of great lawyers, with and against them. What do you think is the hallmark of the true professional, the lawyer that you have been and that you think others should try to emulate?
When I think of great lawyers, I think of Leon Jaworski, I think of Leroy Jeffers, I think of Ben Sewell, I think of Tom Phillips I, I think of Joe Greenhill, I think of Newton Gresham, I think of Jack Binion, I think of Ben of Integrity.
And it's really what it comes down to every
That's
time.
what it's all about.
Well, Joe Reynolds, it's been a pleasure being in your home, and thank you for hosting Murray and me. And I want to give you a chance to tell any story you want to tell. We've got these cameras for all the time we
I want to tell you a personal
want.
story, and you have to listen to this.
I want to hear it.
My greatest experience in the Marine Corps came about 2 years ago. Had a call from a friend of mine named Archie Dunham. Archie's president of Conoco. He goes to my church. Archie's a nice guy. He was in the Marines. And we're friends, but I don't really know much about him. He says, "Come have lunch with me." So I drove out to Conoco offices out off of Eldridge. And I drove up there. Had a great big cyclone fence around these 3 or 4 buildings.
A lot of security.
I thought I was back at Camp Pendleton. And sure enough, they had a gate there, and I fully expected to see this PFC walk out there with a rifle to check my identification. Well, I drove up to that gate, and this guy had on a uniform. Didn't have on a gun, but he said, "Mr. Reynolds, move over and let me drive you to Mr. Dunham's office." He did. I won't bore you with all the details, although they were interesting. Went upstairs, and we were ushered into his office, and there's Archie. He spoke to me. And then there's a stranger sitting on this sofa. Turned out to be the Commandant of the Marine Corps, whose picture's right over there on my, and great man. He had just retired. And when it's all over, he said to me, he said, "Do you know what one Marine says to another Marine when they're fixing to land on a foreign shore?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Say it to me." I said, "General, I'll see you on the beach." He put his arms around me. And he said, "Joe, you're older than I am. And you'll probably get there before I do. But I make you a promise. I'll see you on the beach."